Welcome to the Stop Digging Community Podcast, powered by the nonprofit A² Lamp Groups. I'm Christina, a joyful founding board member since 2014. Your truly unique self-development journey begins today with the first step. Stop digging.
Well, welcome listeners to another great episode of the Stop Digging Podcast, a community podcast put on by A² Lamp Groups, a nonprofit working with workplace issues and people and organizations because we want people to work and play and live better. And we are always happy to have the most amazing guests. And this one you're going to love. We have done episodes in the past. We did an episode with Garrett Biss, episode 20, where he talked about veterans and suicide and PTSD from his own personal experience and how he helps other veterans. We did episode 19 with Linda Hope, a woman from Australia who works with people within her tribe to heal from abuse and trauma, that spiritual trauma as well as physical, mental, emotional abuse. And the person we have today is going to be talking about a few things that is a global issue, and it can only be dealt with holistically. And she has experience with both of those things. And what we're talking about is high performance, high stress jobs that inherently cause things like compassion fatigue, burnout, trauma and PTSD, and, a few other things that she's going to inform us about as we go through that I'm not even familiar with before I met her, and she's going to share those. But I wanted to throw a few numbers out there, as I always do, to just kind of share a little bit about how pervasive these issues are. And these jobs that are high-performing, high-stress jobs, we're looking at the medical field, the emergency and public safety field, military personnel, media on-site teams that travel, report, cover things that are like, earthquakes, floods, different issues like that. Financial analysts, that one surprised me, but sure enough, financial analysts, lawyers, and also CEO, CFO, CTO. In other words, your C-suite execs, high stress jobs inherently create so much stress that unless you have some strategy of dealing with it, you're going to be crushed by it. Jobs that produce conditions that shut down people's physical, mental, and emotional selves overflows into their personal, professional, marital, family life. And then once that dysfunction takes hold, it flows right back into the job life, where you often find people job hopping, leaving jobs. Now, I looked at things that, I wasn't sure that there would be a difference in statistics, but when I was looking at it, trauma, PTSD, people kind of understand what that is. When I was looking at burnout, a couple of things really surprised me. Burnout tends to happen in high-performing, high-stress jobs that you wouldn't think of, but they're jobs that never end. There's never an end to them. And so the top burnout job around the world is agriculture. And it's because you work 24/7. There's no let up. If you're not harvesting, you're reaping. If you're not reaping, you're sowing, you're planning, you're selling. That one surprised me. 84.38% of all agricultural workers are in active burnout. Finance and insurance, 82.5% active burnout. Information and communications, media coverage, basically journalist video crews, 81.38%. And hovering at between 47 and 50% of all burnout professions, project managers, healthcare workers, social service and community workers, educators, be kind to your teachers, folks, and lawyers, right? Compassion fatigue, 73%, healthcare workers, 56%, that's over half of social workers. Emergency workers, especially emergency, but not only emergency. Even in the UK, where they're very focused on workplace conditions, 79% had stress, depression, anxiety. A third of it was due to workplace politics. A third of it was due to interdepartmental communication, and a third of it was due to workplace performance of other people on their team. And the biggest determiner of which trigger you had as your primary stressor was due to your age. So the older you got, the more your workplace politics came into effect. And the work performance of others was the 25 to 34-year-olds. So keep that in mind, because you can fix one problem and three others will come up. And so when we're looking at things, you're going to have to look at solutions that are holistic to not just the person, but the workplace environment that has multiple generations, multiple genders, multiple worldviews, and yet you're all there to do one thing. And that's typically caring for other people and managing your life. And if you have a high performance expectation for your job, high stress job, and if you know somebody, you probably know somebody who is, get them tuned in to this. Let's hear from our amazing guests, because we're going to learn a little bit more about this and where you can go to get help. And you may not even be aware of the symptoms, but we're going to learn some of those today too. So Chris, I'm here with Chris, my co-host, my phenomenal co-host. I love him so much. Chris, tell us who we got.
All right, we're very excited to have Lita Abella. She holds a Juris Doctor degree from Western University College of Law and has experience as a law clerk for prosecutorial agencies. The legal foundation equips her with a deep understanding of conflict resolution and the complexity of the legal field. As the founder of Lita Abella Coaching, Consulting, and Meditation Services, she specializes in coaching and strategic counseling, guiding individuals and organizations to unlock their full potential. As a mediator, she is dedicated to helping parties reach amicable resolutions. Her approach to meditation is client-centered, focused on empathy, neutrality, and facilitating open dialogue to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes. With over a decade of service at the State Bar of California in various investigative and leadership roles, including her tenure on the Union Executive Board, Lita has demonstrated exceptional problem-solving skills and a strong commitment to fairness. Her experience in the Office of Chief Trial Counsel, where she assisted in investigating and prosecuting attorney misconduct, provides her with unique insights into the pressures that legal professionals face, including the risks of disciplinary actions and malpractice lawsuits. Lita is also a seasoned public speaker, delivering educational presentations to professionals in high-stress careers on critical topics such as substance use disorders, mental health, and work-life balance. Her diverse background with Los Angeles Police Department highlights her resiliency, adaptability, and leadership under pressure. She understands the emotional toll that high-stress careers can take, particularly regarding post-traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, and compassion fatigue. She published her first book on these topics, The Abella Model, Leading High-Stress Professionals with Trauma-Informed Practices. Lita is a licensed private investigator and an entrepreneur with 25 years of experience. Her long-standing involvement in the fitness, health, and wellness industry, complemented by a national certifications as a fitness instructor, underscores her commitment to personal well-being and holistic growth. Lastly, she is a professor of business law and paralegal studies, sharing her expertise with the next generation of legal professionals. So here is someone with a really interesting and diverse background, and I think we're going to learn a lot from her. So I'm very excited to welcome Lita. Lita, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Susan. Just a real quick clarification there. My company is coaching, consulting, and mediation services.
Mediation. I was thinking meditation because I did that this morning. So mediation and meditation are two very different things. So apparently, yes. Thank you for that clarification, because that might have been a little confusing.
Maybe if more people meditated, then there would be less need for mediation.
That's an excellent.
Yeah, I have this thing from Jim Rohn. He's an old famous speaker from old. And he talks about taking that moment of silence in the morning to center yourself, which is a practice that I've been using regularly. So maybe that's what was on my mind instead of mediation.
I totally understand. No problem.
Well, Lita, you come from a background of working in so many high stress jobs that I don't even know where to start. In the legal, you worked as a police officer, you are PI, you still maintain your PI license. How did that transpire? You're now a coach, consultant, speaker, trainer, educator. How did you go from all of those years of that to where you are now? Was there a particular point in your life, like a pivot point for you?
So it's very interesting because I never even wanted to be a police officer. And the only reason why I ended up applying back in 1980, that's how long ago this was, Los Angeles Police Department was put under a consent decree to hire more women and more minorities because of certain things that were happening and a lot of lawsuits that were filed against the police department. So they lowered the height requirement from 5'6" to 5 feet. This was the way to open the door to more females and minorities. Now, I happen to be 5'9". I'm very tall. But I thought to myself, wow, if they're so desperate and they're lowering that height requirement to 5 feet, this is going to be something interesting. So I threw my hat in the ringer, and it was very challenging to get through that academy. The physical aspect of it. I've never even touched a gun before in my life, and now I'm learning how to shoot from a sharpshooter to an expert and so on. It was a lot of learning. I ended up being on the police department for 20 years, and I rose to the ranks, saw so many different things. There were just unimaginable calls that I responded to, things that I saw that I can never get out of my mind. Here it is 40 something years later, and I can still picture things vividly of what I experienced.
Didn't you start to experience some trauma like right out of the academy before you even got on the force? Didn't you have one of your colleagues when you
Yes.
were in the academy too? I think you had mentioned that. What you want to share a little bit about that? Because I just right from day one,
What
sustained
happened with
for 20 years.
yeah,
Yeah.
what happened with that incident was, so I graduated from the academy on November 17th, 19 I started the academy on November 17th, 1980. And 1 year later, we were celebrating being on the department for our 1 year. We made it. We've lasted 1 year without being killed and beaten and so forth. And so we went to a restaurant, Pasadena, to celebrate. And we were having a great time. All my academy classmates, which was a group of probably about 40 of us, I believe, out of a class of 80. So only 50% survived the graduation. And then from there, we went back to my house, where at that time I was living in Hollywood. One of the female officers, she wanted to go home. It's late at night, about 2 o'clock in the morning, and she had been drinking, and all of us had been drinking a lot. And we knew she was in no condition to drive. So she kept insisting that she wanted to drive home, and she lived in the valley, which, if you're not in Los Angeles, that's up and over the hill. It's a good ways away, about at least 30 minutes away. And so we took the keys away from her. We told her she was in no condition to drive, and we didn't want anything to happen to her or anybody else if she got behind the wheel. So we thought once we took the keys away from her and she calmed down, we thought, oh, okay, everything's fine. I offered to let her stay at my house so she wouldn't have to drink and drive home. At some point thereafter, she grabbed the keys from one of the classmates, or maybe it was on the table somewhere, but she ended up grabbing her keys, ran out of the door like a bat running out of hell, and just jumped into her car and took off. And we were like, what? So one of my classmates followed her and was trying to catch her to stop her, but she was driving erratically and very fast. And by the time they got over the hill into the San Fernando Valley, she was trying to get off on an exit, and her car just careened off of the embankment. and she was killed instantly. It was traumatic, to say the least. And how I found out was my classmate who was following her, he, at that time when he saw what happened, he ran to the vehicle, tried to save her, but she was already gone. After calling for the police and the ambulance and so forth, he drove back to my house where a lot of my classmates were still there, and he was just drenched and covered in blood. And he didn't even have to say a word. As soon as I opened the door, I knew what happened. And that has stuck with me for all these years. That was 1981. Just to have that on my conscience, that somebody left my house drunk and ended up killing themselves, is just a horrific event to have to deal with. And so from that moment on, I've always been very troubled when I see people who drink and drive, and especially nowadays where you have so many different opportunities. You can call ride sharing, Uber, Lyft, or whatever. You can have a designated driver. But that was
I think in the
What a
80s,
start. I
probably
mean,
before then, but yeah, like Chris was saying, that's it. For me, that would be the main pivot point. I'd be like, maybe do I want to do this? But you stuck with it for 20 years. And I can't even imagine some of the other things that you've seen.
yes.
What was the straw that broke the camel's back for you then?
The reason why I left the police department,
Yeah.
it wasn't the horrific events that I had to investigate and see. I loved the community. I loved being a police officer. I loved helping others.
Right.
It was the politics and the backstabbing and the name calling and the sexual harassment and the discrimination and the racial discrimination and the hostile work environment. Because you got to remember, back in those days, nobody
right.
wanted women on the job. Nobody wanted the minorities on the job. And it's a totally different culture than it is now. The things that were said to me back then, where I had people spit on me. These are my colleagues. Grab my boobs, grab my butt, call me, hey, babes, like, you want to go hit the sack? Just gross, grotesque things. If that were to happen now, you would be fired. You'd have a lawsuit against you. So that was the straw that broke the camel's back as far
But
as.
it speaks to your resilience, though. You look at people. I have friends who were in corporate who experienced the same thing. The first female executives, or there was a lawyer that we used to work with, and the president of the company cornered her in the elevator, and it really speaks to you and her being kind of groundbreakers and understanding and being able to have that resilience to work yourself through that, which probably leads to why you're so good at conflict resolution, because you had to deal with it yourself, I would imagine, for 20 years in what many people today would consider intolerable. And I'm excited to hear what you're doing with all knowledge and expertise and how you're helping other people deal with their difficult situations, because I don't think people could quite understand, particularly today, let's say for my kids or other ones, where this awareness is being raised, where you went through it, right?
Correct. But
Yeah.
one point I want to make, though, and I'm not saying anybody else who has experienced this went through less trauma or things. One big difference because a lot of people say, why did you put up with all this? One of the things is, in the police department, you have to count on your colleagues to save your life. And I've been in situations where it's been in the middle of the night. I'm in a bad area. I've got 3 or 4 robbery suspects prone down on the ground. I'm all by myself. Now, yeah, I have a gun with 6 bullets or whatever, 15 rounds in my 9mm. I can't just start shooting people because I'm scared. You have to have probable cause and be in a imminent life-threatening situation in order to shoot somebody. But when you're calling for backup or assistance or a help call, and you're expecting your colleagues to come and they don't show up because they're like, oh, these stupid women, they don't belong on this job. And if so they want to be here, then they're going to have to fend for themselves. That's the scary part, is when you don't have anyone to help you and you're in a life threatening situation. Because there's been so many times where it would have been easy for the suspects to overpower me, take my gun away, shoot and kill me, dead as a doornail. Luckily, because of my common sense and the fact that women are usually more able to de-escalate situations, I was able to calmly try to talk these suspects into being friendly with them and, hey, let me take you to jail so that we don't both have to get down on the ground and get into a fight and get all dirty and tear our clothes off. And besides, if you were to lose to a female, wouldn't that be embarrassing? You had to come up with some ways to talk the suspects into jail instead of being the gruff, I'm going to kick your butt type of situation.
So what I'm hearing
what I had
from
to learn.
you, and you can check me if I'm misinterpreting it, but mediation became a skill for you that became empowering, because part of the issue with trauma is that it's traumatic because you don't have control over it, over anything, whether it's war, whether it's abuse, whether it's something that you're, you know, observing that you don't really want to, but you've been exposed to that, like your colleague's blood all over another colleague. I like that. That's traumatic, and you don't have control over it. You can't unsee it. You can't unexperience it. And what I was hearing you describe is how mediation became very empowering for you, despite all of your workplace discrimination and devaluing. You were still able to empower yourself.
And yes, and you had to learn fast. Back in those days, I didn't even know what the word mediation meant. I think it's more learning how to resolve conflicts on the spot. And you had to think quickly, and you had to show, even inside, if you were scared and you were trembling, on the outside, you had to show command presence, you had to show competence, and you had to show confidence that you knew what you were doing. Even if it's in the back of your head, you're like, oh my God, what am I doing in this situation? But you had to learn that, and you had to learn it quickly.
So was there a little bit of a play acting going on where you were burned out and traumatized in like over 20 years, but you were still stuck in that play acting role where I have to look strong? Was that ever an issue for you, or not really?
I don't know if the word play acting, but I do understand what you're trying to say. Yes, where you have to put on like your shield of armor and just be like, okay, when I'm got that badge on and I'm out protecting the public, I have to be that face of the police department, and I have to show and act like I know exactly what I'm doing. And there may be times where I didn't. And a lot of the times in situations, I was lucky. There were some really good people who I worked with handling, let's say, barricaded suspect situations where I would be in charge, because I ended up becoming a lieutenant. But how many times have I been in a barricade situation prior to that first one happening, where I had surrounded myself and I tried to recruit the good guys, the former military officers who had the knowledge and experience, who've dealt with these types of situations, who've been in, at that time, the Vietnam War, back in those days, who've experienced so many of these types of issues. I would surround myself with people who had more knowledge than me. They may be of a lower rank, but I would put my trust in them because they had the expertise at that time. I would still be accountable because I was the officer in charge at the time. So in certain situations, there was always good and positive, good situations, and there were and less not as good situations in my whole time on the police force. So if it was all negative, I wouldn't have stayed. But there were a lot of positive times as well.
So I'm thinking the only barricade situations I have in my head are from movies. So if you could explain what a real one looks like, that'd be nice, because one's all the time on the movies. What is that like from the person on that barricade line? Because That's not a perspective we get very often, except with your whatever your anti-hero is that's going past the barricade.
So a barricade situation could be a suspect who is locked himself in his home and
Mm-hmm.
somebody else's home, and it could be a her too. I'm just using the him for right now.
All right.
And where you have to bring in the most skilled person in negotiations, conflict resolution. And at that time, that would have been one of our SWAT officers who have that extra training up until the point where you can bring them in. And usually when you call out SWAT, they will be able to respond within 20 to 30 minutes, no matter where you are in the city of Los Angeles, because they're coming from all different areas. But you just hold the fort down, you secure the perimeter, make sure you're watching all the ingress and egress routes to where the suspect can possibly leave. Once you secure the perimeter, then let that expert come in and do the negotiation. Maybe it's calling on the phone, having that talk. Maybe it's bringing in a family member. Maybe the person is going through a divorce and they're dealing with a child custody issue. Maybe it's bringing in the wife, asking the wife, okay, what is it that are his triggers? Asking really pertinent questions so that we can calm the situation down and peacefully get that suspect to come outside so we can take him into custody without any shots being fired, without anyone losing their life or anyone having any injuries to the community, to the suspect, or to the officers.
What experience, though, that you're bringing to your coaching? That's 20 years of on the job, watching these things happen in real time, negotiation, de-escalation, mediation. That is truly, I'm sure we could spend the entire hour here of you just regaling us of stories, but I'd love to know how now you are using all that experience to help people with stressful situations. The driver for your book, I'd really like to understand that transition, because in my head, I have a very vivid imagination of what it was like for you to be 20 years in that situation and the difficulties you faced, not only personally, but externally, that you were dealing with. So tell us now about what you are doing, bringing that to other people who are in stressful situations, and about what your ideas are on to how help these people who are in these situations, because you certainly have the experience for.
And let me piggyback on that too, because while you were going through this, all of the stuff that you're describing, how did it affect your family life? And when you're helping people, you're talking with people from all of that experience. Like Chris was asking, what are you doing with it now? And what kinds of things are they experiencing that you're looking at and saying, oh yeah, I know exactly what's going on.
So those are like two different questions that can go into two different areas. So I'll answer one first. And I think that your question, Chris, was how did this all transition into why I wrote the book, the people that I'm helping now?
Yeah.
So with 20 years of law enforcement and 25 years as a licensed private investigator, now seeing all additional things, both in the public and private arena as a licensed investigator, then moving into the Office of Chief Trial Counsel, in which I assisted in the investigation and prosecution of attorneys for misconduct. That was an eye-opener for me, because I've always put attorneys on this pedestal of they're very smart, they're very bright, they graduate from law school, they got their law degree, passed the bar, and they help people, which 80-90% do. They help people in all areas of the practice, from family law to criminal law, immigration law, and so forth. But when I was in the Office of Chief Trial Counsel, all I saw were the bad attorneys, the attorneys who misappropriated funds. And I'm talking thousands to millions of dollars. The attorneys who never responded back to clients who called and trying to find out what's going on with their case. To the attorneys who were running mills, such as personal injury, workers' compensation, where they have hundreds, maybe even thousands of clients who got into a traffic accident and they send him to a specific doctor. Oh, you need to keep going to the doctor, so we can drive up all those medical bills. I have this one case, it's not funny and I shouldn't smile, but it was very interesting. This client filed a complaint against their attorney who he had hired to represent him in a reckless driving charge. You think, okay, that's a simple allegation. It's a vehicle code allegation, go to court. Anyway, the attorney failed to appear in court. So the client's all, geez, I pay this attorney this money, doesn't even show up. I'm sitting here in court by myself. I have no one to represent me. So he lost his case. The client lost his case. And he goes home and he Googles his attorney's name. Guess where his attorney happened to be?
In prison.
Yes. Let me put it this way. He was in jail, not prison. He was in jail for killing his wife / receptionist at the law firm. So he had a valid excuses for not being in court. But I was like, what?
Oh, dear.
Wow.
So
wow.
My job as
that's just a bad day all around. Everyone had a bad day that day.
Wow.
My job as the investigator on that complaint was, and the protocol is, when there is a complaint against an attorney, we write a letter with the allegations of charges to the attorney, and they respond back in a written form with their supporting evidence. So I was like, so tell me, why didn't you show up for court? And why is it that you allegedly killed, tell me about this alleged murder that you're in jail for pending your trial. And it was just, I was flabbergasted. I'm like, oh my God. And he turned out, he was a very nice person on paper. He was, yes, I apologize to my client, but I do have a good excuse. I was not able to be in court that day because I've been here in jail, held on no bail for the alleged killing of my wife / receptionist. And I was just like, wow, you just wouldn't think an attorney would do that. Now, I don't remember what happened with the rest of his story, if he was convicted, but I've seen so many different things.
In a profession like law or police officer, that kind of goes back to what I was getting at, is it's not just high pressure and putting on masks at work because you got to function. It's like, when do you take those masks off? Do you get to be vulnerable with your spouse? If not, are you killing them? Like, does it get to the point where, is that a factor, or is that just something totally different?
Right. And you bring up an excellent point, because when you are in these high stress jobs where it's constant over and over 24/7, and you never really have any downtime to just take a breath and breathe. So what happens? A lot of times people in these high stress industries self-medicate. That could be using and abusing drugs. It could be food. It could be gambling, pornography, a whole long list of things. The majority of what I saw, and what I even myself became accustomed to, was drinking. Just go home and it's, oh my God, after seeing all the things I saw today, I need something to calm me down, because I'm just a basket case right now. And you start off a couple drinks, maybe 1 or 2 drinks during the week, and then it becomes 1 or 2 drinks for the day, and then it becomes over the weekend, you're binge drinking, where you're downing 6, 7, 8 beers or whatever it is that you drink. And now that just becomes this habit and pattern of abuse. And it's like, I can't even function unless I'm drinking. And what that also could lead to is, now you've got this Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde personality, where somebody gets on your spouse, your kids, maybe you start beating them because it's, leave me alone. They don't understand that you went to a homicide today and that you had to deal with the death of a child, and or the suspect who just molested a 16-year-old. And you're seeing all these things, and the way for you to escape it is with one of these addictions or self-medicating. And then when your spouse comes in and, hi, honey, how's it going? Do you want to have chocolate cake for dessert today? And you're like, WTF? I can't deal with that right now. I don't care what kind of dessert we're going to have. My head is ready to explode because you don't understand what I've been through today. And most spouses in high stress jobs, whether you're an attorney, law enforcement, doctor, mental health professional, you don't want to talk to your spouse because they're not in the same industry. For the ones that aren't, they're not going to understand when you try to explain a crime scene to them. Think of Law and Order or whatever they show on TV now. I'm dating myself. They're going to think of
I think that's still on the air. It's been on the air a long time.
for 20 something years.
Probably.
And this is where the family unit starts to break up.
Yeah.
The officer, the doctor, the lawyer's not talking to the spouse. They're not playing with the kids. They're not going to the recital. They're not going to soccer practice with the kids. The other spouse has got all of these, why aren't you here? You're not taking part of the family. And all these high stress jobs, you're working overtime a lot. It's not, oh, I get off at 5 and boom, the clock stops. I can now just focus on my family. For most of these jobs, like a doctor, an attorney, mental health professional, you've got it. You may have clients who are still calling you 24/7, or you have to have that downtime by yourself so you can de-stress and just try to recover back into a human being again.
And also, like, learning how to verbalize it so that you're not inflicting the trauma that you've experienced onto someone like a spouse. So having what you just described was the slow erosion of your entire support group. Your family can't support you, your wife can't support you, your husband can't support you, but so where do you get support from? If you're constantly putting that mask on, everything's okay. I've got to I have authority. I have to have command presence, whether it's police officer, a doctor, that confidence, ER worker, a journalist, all of the professions we talked about in the beginning, social worker with caseloads up the yin yang. So yeah, you've got, it's like a spiral, right? And you can't verbalize it. So what your book is doing is you're trying to verbalize some of this. Is that what I'm understanding with your model? Teaching people how to verbalize?
What I'm trying to teach in my 6-step framework is the first thing is you've got to understand that you have to be aware of it. You have to be aware of these issues that can pop up, of these traumas that can pop up, of these mental health issues that can pop up. There was something I was going to answer for your other question, and now I forgot it. But what I try to explain in my book is I talk about a 6-step framework. And it's not only for the individuals, but for the organization as well. Oh, because now I know what you were asking about. Your first question was asking about resources. So a lot of times people in these high stress industries only socialize with the same type of people. Police officers are socialize with police officers. Medical professionals socialize with medical professionals, whether it's doctors and nurses or somebody in their same industry. Attorneys usually socialize with other attorneys, legal professionals, because number one, they understand what's going on because they're also in it. And they're there working the 10, 12, 16 hours for those who have come back into the office, because a lot of us are still working remotely, depending on what your industry is. But definitely for like first responders, obviously you have to be out in the field, whether you're a firefighter, police officer, paramedic, out there in the field helping. And so what can that lead to when the person whose shoulder that you can lean on, the one who is your buddy to go out drinking with, the one who you share those personal, intimate stories with, because you don't want to share it with your wife or your husband, your spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend. because one, they don't understand, and two, you don't want to put that trauma on them. You share it with your work husband or your work wife. We all have somebody at work who we're very close with, and a lot of times it could be the opposite sex that you just have that really close bond with. And sometimes that can lead to having a now really close personal connection, which may lead to divorce because this person at work understands you and you're spending the 12, 14 hours with them. So you don't want to go home because you know that they're just going to nag you and ask you so many questions about what happened at work. They're not going to understand. You rather stay at work and talk to your close friend, whether it's male or female, whoever it is that's your resource there. That may not be the perfect resource, but that's the resource that most people will use because they understand and they're going through the same and situations that you're dealing with.
Yeah, that's that person in the trench with you, right?
Yes.
That is can experience all those things. It's interesting. I remember now my wife wasn't a first responder and those kind of things, but she was a project manager and it was long hours. And then she had a really difficult drive home. And I remember she would come through the door. This time I was working on getting my teaching degree, and she would be angry when she walked through the door. And I'm like, what is going on? And it would last until the next day when she went in. And I said, this isn't working. We've got to make a change. So we ended up moving closer so she didn't have to have the commute. And I think that a lot of the jobs that you've described, police officer, first responder, there's not just the normal pressures and or difficult pressures, but you also have that additional trauma. But like the pressures and the difficulties that people have at work and that stress at work applies even broader than those, particularly like a police officer who sees, you describe it like trauma, murder as equally difficult as that. And it's just fascinating to think about because I was really resonating with me what you were saying, but to, let's say, what we can be considered a less stressful job, right, than, let's say, a police officer or a negotiator kind of thing. But I think these are human things that we all experience, which is why I think your book obviously will resonate with a lot of people because people deal with stress. I call it's not a competition, right? Everybody has different tolerances or develops different muscles for it. I would say that you, over 20 years, have developed a musculature towards difficulties and traumas. And now you can share that with us for people who may still be at the beginning stages of dealing with these kind of stresses. Definitely like to hear about the 6 parts of your program as much as you want to share, because I think getting down to those pieces and people understanding, not just in some of those professions we described, but just as a human being dealing with pressures of family and work and trying to find that time and with your partner that you may not necessarily have, I think is going to be important. So I'm very excited to hear about it. So
And
give us a little more. I'd love it.
also you talked about the first step being awareness. What does that even look like? If you're like what you described right now, constantly go 14-hour days, you've separated from this family unit of support outside of your work and you're immersed in your work, and now your only resource is someone who's just as traumatized as you. And
We shouldn't laugh, but yeah, that's
whether you're in medical or whatever and you're in the trenches, military, whatever, and if that's your only support, the way you verbalize it with the people who are going through it is going to be very different than what it takes to get out of that. So what does that awareness even look like
Right.
when you're in that? Like, how would somebody, like, I want people to listen to this episode because this is important. Because if you're at the cusp of that and you're like, hey, that's me, what Lita says next, pay attention because this is what it looks like. Awareness.
But before we even get into that, let me first identify what it is that I'm talking about in the book. So in the book, and there's a lot of different, first, let me put a disclaimer. I am not a mental health professional. I'm not a LCSW and psychologist, psychiatrist, or anything like that. My expertise comes from firsthand being out in the trenches knowledge, and of course, reading, studying, learning, taking training, my education skills, and so forth. But I looked at 4 particular types of mental health issues, not diagnosis, but mental health issues, because some are diagnoses and some are just issues. They're not in the DSM-5. PTSD. What is PTSD? Everybody knows post-traumatic stress disorder, but what exactly is it? It's when you actually are involved in a traumatic experience. And for different people, it could be different. For somebody, it could be getting involved in a traffic accident. That could be a traumatic experience. I know people who gotten into a traffic accident. To them, it was a very serious traffic accident, and they will never drive down that freeway again because it's just traumatic to them. For others, it could be something as traumatic as witnessing a shooting. So it's something either that you have experienced yourself or that you witness. That's post-traumatic stress disorder. Vicarious trauma is the repeated stories of other people's trauma. You hear this as an attorney. You hear this as a medical or mental health professional. You may hear it as a school counselor, as a journalist. You're out there investigating. You're out in the trenches and you're hearing the stories of the horrific Palisades fires or the Eaton fires. So many other industries that are dealing with vicarious trauma. Compassion fatigue was the third one. And compassion fatigue is when you've heard the stories so many times that you just become numb. You're like, it goes in one ear and out the other. You may have a victim who has been sexually abused, but you hear about this every day. Every day you go in and there's somebody who's been sexually abused. To you, it's no big thing. It's like going to McDonald's and buying a hamburger. You do it every day. Just the facts. Okay, what happened? And then what? Okay, great. Then what? Then what did he do? Okay, fine. Thank you. Goodbye. Very matter of fact. You don't care. You don't treat the person with empathy and respect and professionalism because you're so burnt out. And the reason why you do that is because if you let your heart listen, it will eat at you. And so you put this shield up to avoid that. You don't want to know about, you don't want to see how that affected that person personally. And so to protect you, you just become a robot at it. And then there's the burnout. And burnout specifically deals with in a work environment situation where you've just been working and spinning your wheels. And I'm not giving you that. I don't have the actual medical health description of it in front of me, but I'm just giving you off the top of my head description. Burnout where you are just so fed up with what you're doing. You don't enjoy the work anymore. It's something that you can do in your sleep. You don't have that passion anymore. You start just not treating your clients or your patients or your customers the way they should be treated. It just starts to show up in all aspects of the business, of the career, and you just need to maybe go into a different area of practice, whether it's in the legal industry, changing from maybe family law to immigration law, or if you're in the medical field, maybe you don't want to be a surgeon anymore. Maybe you want to teach surgery now to the incoming students at USC or whatever, trying to do something different to get that passion back up and running. So those are the 4 different mental health issues that I talk about in my book. So then moving to the 6-step framework. Now, my first one is the amplify of awareness. First, you have to be aware, is there something wrong? Am I going through any of those last 4 issues that I just talked about? Do I treat people disrespectfully? Do I not show empathy when somebody's coming up to me and telling me about a very traumatic personal experience? Do I just give me the bare facts? That's all I need here. And maybe sometimes that is all you need, but you can't treat the client that way. You can't treat the patient that way. So individuals must confront avoidance by accepting and becoming aware of the problems. One must be able to face it in order to fix it. And for organizations, they can support this step by fostering open communication and creating a culture where acknowledging challenges is encouraged rather than stigmatized. So all these steps that I talk about, it's not only for the individual, but also for the organization that you're working for, because it's not going to do any good if you now are aware there's a problem and you want to do something about it, and you go to your boss, your supervisor, your director, your CEO, and they're like, that's not my problem. That's part of the job. If you don't like it, there's the door. So the next step is beyond blame. We got to break free from the blame and shame and the suck it up mentality, which in the police force, you hear that all the time. Same thing in healthcare. We know as doctors, when they're going through their residency, it's like a badge of honor to be up for 2-3 days at a time. And I know of a story where this young doctor was telling us about when she was going through her residency, where she was so sleep deprived. She ended up having, I forgot the name of the medical terminology, but she almost died because of sleep deprivation. And can you imagine? You're a doctor, you're treating patients, you're diagnosing patients, you're administering and ordering medication for patients, you're telling them to take tests, and you haven't had sleep for 2 or 3 days. And this is the way they expect you to be, because back in the day when I was a young resident, this is the way they treated me. So we're going to treat you the same way. And if you can't handle it, then you don't need to be in this type of industry either. So there's the door.
So in changing the workplace, we're talking about changing like work hazing expectations, right?
That's the word that I had in my head too, was
Yeah.
hazing.
Because the one that you described right now, the medical apprenticeship hazing, I guess you could say, you can't be a real doctor. This is your last step. You have to stay awake for until you're hallucinating, kind of thing. All of these high performance professions have some level of negative expectation that you have to overcome that thing to prove yourself, right?
Right.
I don't know what that is in the police department or what it is in the legal department, CEO level, C-suite. There's often that level of obstacle, or where you get the key to the executive bathroom kind of thing, but you don't get it until you've gone through. I wonder if part of the awareness is understanding that you're on that hamster wheel. And the reason you can't get off, you can get off by leaving your job, which often people do, right? There's a lot of job hopping within those high stress professions. But, you can remove yourself, you can change yourself. But the workplace itself, if that doesn't change, it'll be hard to stay in that profession and change. And that's what I'm hearing. So part of the awareness is being open to the scary piece of, if I change myself, does that mean I need to change my profession? And so that's what awareness looks like, experiencing that fear. And that's healthy. So if you're a social worker, a healthcare worker, and you're just resonating with what Lita has been describing and sharing with us, and you're like, yeah, that's me. I don't know how much longer I can go on dealing with work and my divorce and fill in the blank. Part of your awareness is to recognize that if you change, there's going to be some fear involved about either changing your job, standing up in your workplace to change things in your workplace, learning to verbalize when you don't want to. All of the things that Lita has been talking about that do not come natural, and it's not going to feel natural. It's going to feel wrong. And that's part of the awareness. And that's actually a good thing, according to your book. Right?
And that's really okay. So what are your options? One, stay there and suck it up and just do what they say until you burn out, die, get sick, quit, right? Or two, quit now and go somewhere else. and hope and pray that wherever you go, it's going to be a better situation. 3, depending again on what your industry is, maybe start your own practice where you're going to be in a situation where you're never going to put anybody in that type of bad work environment, where you can start your own law firm, your own medical practice. You still got to get through the 10, 12, whatever years it is of medical school. Put yourself into some kind of situation where you have the opportunity to make change. And maybe that's 4. Be in a situation where you have the voice to speak up. Look, I've always been, and I don't want to get into politics here, but I've always been very pro-union. I've always been a union advocate to speak up for not only myself, but for others in the workplace. And that put a large, gigantic target on my back where I've ended up getting myself, I don't want to say I can say like in trouble, and I was always getting disciplined for whatever, because I was the one that spoke up not only for me, but for others when I felt we were being treated unfairly, because a lot of them did not want to come and speak up for the alleged employment and labor law violations that we saw. But if somebody doesn't speak up, how do we change the norms of these types of industries? Otherwise, it's just going to continue. For example, what I described back in 1980 of what I went through on the LAPD, if they were to do that now, there is no way. There's no way those things that happened then are happening now. There might be a few knuckleheads that are still around, but nothing as egregious as it was back then, because the laws have changed, and the laws have changed, policies and procedures have changed, because people have spoken up and said, we're not taking this anymore. This is ridiculous.
Workplace expectations have changed.
Yes.
And unless you recognize that, your voice, once you find your voice, learn how to use it where you are, right? Because you might be able to change your workplace. Even if, let's say you're an officer, if you're at an officer level, maybe you can't change the entire workplace, but can you change the interaction with your team? Can you change how can you help your people learn how to verbalize? Can they watch you and see how you verbalize the awareness that you're getting?
I think one of the things I always argue is that I was working at a company and I was talking about some of the changes that's come in. And I remember someone saying, that's not our culture. And I'm always like, you're part of the culture. So it really, what you're talking about is being able to stand up in your strength and saying, hey, this isn't right, and talking about that. With that, we'll loop back to the book. So if you want to get more information about this, there's the Abella Model, Leading High Stress Professionals with Trauma-Informed Practices. I strongly encourage you to get this book. I hope it's on Audible, because that's the way I listen to all my books now.
Hello, friends. Thanks for listening. A Squared Lamp Groups powers this podcast. Their memberships are tax-deductible donations that directly support their work developing people and organizations. But just for you, they're offering podcast listeners a special 40% off coupon code to join. Your benefits as a member include additional resources, perks, and access that you can use all year, including an additional 30 minutes of bonus podcast content for every episode. Simply use the code 4listeners at checkout. That's the number 4, all caps, listeners at checkout. They also are giving our listeners free gifts to use now. Go to their website, asquaredlamps.org/podcast, and download your free My Success Course of Action worksheet. There is no cost, registration, or sales pitch involved. Just click it and save. Use it to work on something significant to you this month, maybe even something that sparks interest from today's podcast. Then click to join our free but private Stop Digging Podcast LinkedIn group, where the conversation continues between you, the hosts, and our guests. Don't forget to subscribe and share this podcast with your friends. And now, back to the program.
I just want to remind everyone that we have a book here that you can get more of this information. And I think we can say safely to this point that this is someone with a lot of credibility. So it's the Abella Model, leading high stress professionals with trauma informed practices. And we've covered, and there it is. There it is the book. And I encourage you to get some wisdom from this wonderful woman here. Maybe you could share a little bit more about some of the things that you've been sharing with us so far, and maybe even a little bit more for our readers, because this is some great content, and I'm sure people will find it worthwhile.
We were moving into the step 2. So we talked about step 1, which was amplify awareness and confronting avoidance. And then we started to move into beyond the blame, which was break free from the blame and shame and the suck it up mentality. And by shifting from blame and shame to accountability, professionals empower themselves to seek solutions and support. And then for organizations, they can implement regular well-being check-ins and provide access to confidential self-assessment tools to help staff monitor their health. So one of the ways of finding out, do I suffer from any of these issues, is to look at self-assessment tools. And self-assessment tools are something you can find on the internet. Some are free, some you have to pay for. I created one that actually talks about, it's like a little checklist, asks you maybe 8 to 10 questions for each of the mental health issues that I talked about: the PTSD, vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout. And if you answer yes to so many questions, you may be dealing with those issues, and it may be recommended to seek help from a mental health professional. It's not a diagnosis or anything like that.
Something people should consider, right?
Exactly.
Here's an assessment that you can look at and go, wow, maybe I need to think about this a little more. I think that's what you're getting to, right? Is here's something that might raise your awareness to this, that you may be experiencing this, but seek professional help or do some introspection on it. So I think that's an important clarification for people. And truly, I think so many people are experiencing empathy overload. A lot of these things, even though I was not in what you would consider like a high stress field like this, a lot of these things still resonate with me, even if I don't deal with like life and death situations every day. So I think everyone can understand these pieces.
But even
So please,
if you're in education and you're just burnt out, I mean, having something external that you could just check in on, just to get it out of your head, so it's not just bouncing around in there. Let me dig in a little bit and ask you a question, Lita. When you're you've been in like 3 or 4 different high stress, high performing job roles. What does the blame game look like? You talk about being beyond the blame. Is it blaming your spouse, blaming the workplace, just accepting it? What does the blame look like when you're talking about blame? Because if you're like a surgeon and you're making lots of bucks and maybe you're on your second divorce, but you're still doing great. You don't feel well, but who are you blaming? You're at the top of your field. What do you do? What does that look like?
It could be everything you just said. It could be the job. It could be that you've been dealing with some issues, but you just kept pushing it aside. I can't sleep. I'm eating too much. I'm drinking too much. I'm not spending time with the kids, but I got to work too. What do they want from me? Do they want me to make money so I can pay the house mortgage and pay the cars and do all this and that? Or do they want me home so I can take the kids to soccer practice and the piano recital? What do they want? Why can't you have both? Why can't you have a balanced life? And if you can, what do you need to do to have that? Do you always have to work 24/7? Do you always have to be on call? And I think the answer is no. Unless you're like the only world-renowned surgeon who can do this special operation that you're 1 out of 5 people in the entire globe that can do it, maybe yes, you have to be on call 24/7. But the majority of us, do we really have to be on call 24/7 and respond to work 24/7 to clients? I'm sorry, you were going to say something, Chris?
well, yes, there's something here that it's people have an identity, and sometimes they identify with being the doctor maybe proceeds. Like I have an old friend of mine that was a cardiac surgeon, right? So his identity, a lot of their some people's identity can be around that being the primary focus of their life, and so other things seem to fall down from that identity. And I think what you're saying is your identity can be both, right? You can be the top surgeon or the top policeman and the father that shows up to things or the mother that shows up to these other things. And I think where what I've experienced is some people, let's say their identity gets a little bit out of skew. Like the payoff they get, the greatest payoff from is I just saved someone's life. If you're in the military or a policeman and I've saved this from happening and this from happening, this from happening, and then I go home and you're like, hey, you got to do the dishes. You're like, meh, that's not my identity. My identity is I save people's lives. I'm not the dishwasher. So I think for me, like maybe you can unpack that a little bit, because I think I've seen people who see themselves as high performers and that's their identity. And then you go home and you're sometimes dealing with things that are, let's say, a little less mundane, and understanding that's part of the identity if you want a well-balanced life. So maybe you can unpack that a little bit in your knowledge, but that's what kind of went through my mind when I was thinking of these people of blaming and what's going on. You can have it, but you have to identify with being great at both things, the parent and the doctor, lawyer, policeman.
I think it all has to do as well with the stages of your life. So maybe as you graduate from medical school or law school, or you're just getting that PhD in whatever as an educator, there's going to be that time in your career where you need to prove yourself. You need to show, you may need to work the long hours to get that expertise up, to be known as the expert in that field, to get those high level skills of the best surgeon in cardiac heart surgery or whatever. I'm just going off of TV shows now, but
Yeah.
So there's going to be that learning curve, but at some point you can't continue to do that for the next 20, 30, 40 years, because your body is not going to be able to handle that physically, emotionally, intellectually, mentally. You can't be on top going at 110 miles an hour all the time. It's just not going to work. At some point you're going to crash and burn.
But what you're talking about is important, and if our listeners are listening to what Lita just said here, is that the eventual crash and burn happens with small symptoms along the way. So if all you're doing is blaming the symptoms, they're all like, oh, I got to stop eating donuts, or I stop drinking, or whatever the symptoms of the burnout or the compassion fatigue or the vicarious trauma or the PTSD, whatever those symptoms are, and whatever your outlets are, you can blame all of these symptoms and try to handle them. You can blame the job and job hop. There's a lot of turnover in these positions. But if your identity is wrapped up in that, Lita said something very important. She said, learning to say no. Changing your mindset when you're beyond the blame. She just said, can't I be both? And if I'm both, that means that some of the time I have to say no to the job. The power is back in your realm in Lita's second step here.
Yeah, it's taking responsibility for what you're experiencing, right? If I think the good example you gave was like, if you start with one drink to calm you down, and that moves to two, which moves to six a night, that awareness of, wait, I'm hiding something here. And that's where people obviously get into trouble over years. Like you said, going 20, 30, 40 years like that, you're probably not going to make it, because you're going to have issues with your liver or your health or something else. And I think raising that awareness that you talked about, which I believe was step one, was like being aware of it and saying, okay, wait a second, is this really something's going on here? And maybe I need to get some help, or I need to make some changes. I think is important. So you can see how they loop together, these two concepts.
On a smaller level too, we all just went through COVID not too long ago, 4 years ago. If you think it doesn't happen, I can tell you right away that it happened to us. right? We started off, we thought, okay, we'll have cocktail Fridays because we wanted something to look forward to while we were staying at home. And then by the end of 2 years, it was beer Tuesdays, it was wine Mondays, it was craft cocktail Wednesdays. And I
Vodka
remember,
shot Fridays. Is that what
yeah,
you're saying?
exactly. It was like whiskey Thursdays. Like pretty soon it was like every day and it
Yeah.
snuck up on you. And would I have said,
That is
oh, I'm
so
an
true.
alcoholic? No. You're looking for some escape or some way out or way to deal with it. And if you had asked me, are you traumatized? I would have probably said no, but I look back now and I think, yeah, after a while we were going stir crazy and it was traumatic. And a lot of people, especially some of the kids, are still recovering from that educationally. So I have to say that we look at all these high performing jobs and these life and death situations and we think, oh, it's them. But we're just as susceptible, right? And that awareness is part of it, but the blame, don't blame the symptoms. It wasn't the alcohol. It was the situation. It was the reality of having to cope with something that we weren't allowed to do. And if you're in a job where that's your identity, as Chris was saying, that's your profession, it's what you've chosen, it's how you're supporting the rest of your life. And you can blame it, you can try to self medicate for coping. But what Lita was saying is, and what you were saying too, is that learning to embrace the fear of change, learning that you have the power to say no, those are very empowering things. And also learning to verbalize it. I know, Lita, you're, in addition to being a consultant, a PI, an educator, and a speaker, you also are,
That's a lot of hats.
she's also a credentialed coach. And so the whole credentialed coach thing is that you can help people verbalize and talk through these things, whether it's a company-wide team, learning how to verbalize what they're going through, learning how to say no and how to hear no in your workplace. That's important because you can learn how to say no. And if your boss is not on board with that and doesn't know how to handle it, your blowback is going to be so negative, you'll never say no again. So,
So
yeah.
what is our next step, just out of curiosity? Because I think the blaming piece to it, because you've hinted at what I heard was a little bit of courage, right? The courage to be able to say no, the courage to step up and say that, hey, this isn't right. Take us through maybe the next step, and then we can refer people to your book, because I don't know if we're going to, obviously not going to have time to go through all of it, but really fascinating stuff. So what is our next step after this? Or is there more to the blaming?
Before I answered that, there were two things I wanted to comment on what Susan said. And now I'm going to hope I can remember what I was going to say. One is, if you look at people who were on their deathbeds, whether they were older at the end of their life or and they were younger and something happened and they know that they're going to die, the one thing you always hear people say is, I just wish I spent more time with my family. I can never get that time back. To the question of, if you had to live your life all over again, what's the one thing you would change? And that's 99% of the time what most people say. And it's true. You'll never be able to see your kid make that first step, say mama for the first time, first day in kindergarten, or whatever. Those moments are just moments that you will always cherish for the rest of your life. But if you aren't there because you were so busy working and giving 150% to your career, whether it's your career or your business, which you're responsible for, it's still, you're never going to get that time back. That's number one. The other thing I wanted to mention is the newer generation, the younger generation, and I can't even remember what generation we're on because I just know I'm a baby boomer and there's all these other D's and G's and P's and Q's, whatever, after me. But this younger generation, which is the generation my son's in, who happens to be an attorney, they have a different mindset. They're into, you know what? I want a job where I'm not going to be working 12, 14 hours a day. I want the weekends off. I want good pay. I want to be able to come home and watch my movies on HBO. They have a totally different mindset. Back in my day, you went to your employer and you were there 20, 30, 40 years. There was no just hopping around from employer to employer. If you look at the younger generation now, and I'm talking about the 20 and 30-year-olds, a year here, 2, 3 years here, a couple years here, they're all over the place. Some say it's good, some say it's not good. But the one thing that they have put forth that I've seen from talking to the younger generation is, I'm not going to work myself to the bone like my parents and my grandparents did, because look what happened to them. They lost their pension, they died and never even got to spend their first retirement check. They lost their home because now prices are so high. Just things have changed.
That's
They
important,
want
by the
to
way.
enjoy their life now. Why can't they enjoy their life now as a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old? They want to start a family and not wait until they're 45 and 50 to have the first kid.
Well,
It's a different mindset.
changing their expectation though can maybe change the workplace expectation too. Because if you're trying to hire people into your company, it's hard to get police officers. They're short police officers. They're short educators. You can't find them. Short
Nurses,
They're short social workers.
yep,
Health industry for the last 10 years has been one on the hot career list because they can't fill positions fast enough. They lose people. And if the expectation is we need to keep people or attract people, and their highest priority is work-life balance, you've just changed the expectation of your workforce. But if you want to keep them and retain them, you're going to have to do some of what Lita is describing in her book. And she has a program and she's been working, she has a workshop, she has an assessment she just told you about. And all of these things are going to make your workplace, your team, your department more attractive to the people that Lita just described, the younger generation that you want to employ, because their expectation is not that they're going to put up with whatever you tell them, right? They're just not.
I, not to put too fine a point on this, but this is something that I've experienced before too, and I think this is really important for people to hear. And I'm glad that you, Lita, that you brought it up, and you too, Susan. It's that, look, when you talk about culture, when people wonder we can't retain anyone, you really have to ask yourself as an organization why. Because people want to feel like you care about them more than they're just going to work at their job until they're bone tired and numb. And people just, particularly the younger generation, they've seen exactly what you said. They saw their father or mother get laid off. And I have personal stories on exactly this that I talk about, that this is what happens. And those kids remember that, just like you said. And I think this is really important for people playing by in like a 1950s handbook, which is you stay somewhere and then you're going to get a pension and this kind of thing, and the company's looking out for you. And the younger generation says, I don't believe that, and I'm not going to work myself to the bone. So I think it's a really important point that you've brought up here, that I think if people want to change their organization, they have to be aware of that. And I think you can get a lot of great work out of people if they're working hard for the 8 hours they're there and they trust that you have their best interest for them. You're going to have a very productive workforce. So,
I look at the Googles and the Microsofts and all
yeah,
the Silicon Valley locations that are still existing, where they had the campuses, where they have the cafes there, where you can eat healthy food. They're trying to have locations where it's almost like home away from home. Get comfortable. You can come to work in jeans and a t-shirt. You
they
don't have
have
to wear
daycare,
a suit. Daycare, exactly.
Nourishment, because when you're in a high stress job, you need nourishment because you're working. And
yeah,
yeah,
And they're more productive. I've seen now law firms where they have wellness coordinators, they have yoga rooms, they have, food on their little cafeterias. They have, if you need to take a mental health wellness day, take one. We rather have you do that than to go off on a client and cuss them out because you're up to here with so much stress on the caseload that you're carrying. Just let us know what you need and we're going to try to help you. Because if you are doing a great job for your organization. I don't care if it's legal, health, education, journalists, whatever, law enforcement, you're going to treat the client, the customer, the citizen, the victim with respect and dignity. And then they will come back to you. And your profits are going to increase. Your brand, your goodwill will increase. It's going to be an organization that people will want to come to because they know they treat the client right, the customer, and they treat their personnel right. They don't want to go to the, I don't want to use this term slave owner, but sweatshop. They don't want to go to the sweatshop employer where the people don't even get a break.
And you're not going to get the best out of people. It's as simple as that. You're not going to get the best out of people if you're working them to death. Then what you're going to get is you're going to get that people go, I'm burned out. I'm just going to do the bare minimum. And I'm just going to sit here and clock my time and then get out as soon as humanly possible and go home and complain about work. Or you want people who really, if you want people to be excited about work, you need to support them. And I think this is what you're, especially for these, let's say I'm Gen X, just then there's a lot of more alphabet after X. I know what you're saying. So Y, Z, whatever it is now. But they are buying into this, again, this idea of a work-life balance. And I think it's important for people to know, particularly people who have an old school kind of mentality about it. You work 60 hours a week or 80 hours a week, and that's what you have to do. And I think the perfect example, which I always think absurd, is the doctors. What are we treating? You having a doctor who's been up for 72 hours in the emergency room making decisions when they're hallucinating about unicorns? Come on, this doesn't make any sense.
You don't operating on you or treating you.
No, exactly. So it seems absurd, and I think it's important for people to understand that. And I appreciate you bringing these to the table. Susan, you had something you wanted to say. So
Yeah, I was just going to say, when we're listening to all of this, all of our listeners, if you know somebody who is in a field, or if you are in this field and any of this is resonating with you, if you're looking at your workplace and you're saying, all of these great things that you just described about like daycare, cafeterias, a wellness lawyer on our team who's helping us be fit. And if you're an educator and you don't have anybody who's noticed even that you're all burned out and you got nothing left, walking through her book is a start. Getting those resources is a start. But if your workplace isn't that way, get the word out to them too. Because the expectation is changing. And if they want to be competitive, if they want to be effective, whether you're a school or a community center or a journalistic team, learning to say no for yourself is good, but also teaching your organization to adjust their expectations too. And your ownership, because that's one thing that we talk a lot about in workplace leadership development, is just owning things. There's like ownership workers. Well, that's great, but you can own too much. So maybe your boss isn't telling you to work 80 hours, but you own it and feel like Chris was saying, it's such a part of your identity. You own it so much that you're willingly working 80 hours. Right? That is not humanly sustainable.
it's not healthy.
No, it's not. And Lita, you have fitness and wellness resources. You have an assessment just to get you thinking to see if maybe you might be experiencing one of those four things that you described. You have a book that has stepped programs. You have a workshop that you can bring into somebody's workplace to train them. You are able to come and speak and have some interaction one-on-one with people. You're able to coach people so they can book you and have sessions with you where they can learn to verbalize some of this stuff and get it out and learn those words and experience what it's like to change. So you have it covered in a holistic way, from the very inception all the way through to let's do it together.
Yeah, implementation, absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why we have you on and we kept you on for a full 90 minutes is because we want this resource in people's hands. So your book is available on Amazon.com. It's called The Abella Model. That's Abella, The Abella Model. So it's only $10, folks. It's a steal. buy it, give it away to somebody who really needs to see it. Send the link, go to her website. Lita, tell us what your website is.
My website is my first and last name. So it's Lita Abella.com.
Okay. And so look for it on there. I believe it's on in your book too. So there are
Yes.
links in your book, and don't wait. Don't wait until you get in your car and a bad decision.
Wait for it on Audible like me. I listen to
I'm working
I
on
encourage you
that.
to actually read the book because I listened to all the books that I've been listening to have been on Audible recently. I want to add one more thing here because the exciting part about having you on here, Lita, is that I think people have to understand that you bring a credibility and experience to this that many people are not going to have. Everybody has different, let's say, special sauce for what they're doing, but you with your background in particularly in the timing of when you went through the police force and all the things that you learned, how one just to get yourself through it, how to negotiate, how to learn all these things. This is a book that you're going to get somebody who's been doing this in real time at critical moments in history for this. Because like you said, when you entered it, there was no controls in place, let's say, and there was an old school mentality about it and having to navigate those things. And what I really would like our listeners and your potential readers to say is, look, you've demonstrated courage in what would be considered a very difficult situation. And I'm always of the frame of mind, if you can see someone who has shown that courage, that can help people to bring that courage to themselves. And they can get the tips, tools, and techniques from Lita and from her book, or you can have her come out and speak to your team or your business, or you can hire her as a coach. And I think I would strongly encourage you to do this because you're not going to get too many people with this kind of expertise and experience. So I strongly encourage you to do that. And I'll just say, it's been fascinating. I feel like we could all just go out and maybe have a couple of drinks and you could tell some stories that maybe more of the fun ones. I don't know if I need more of the dramatic ones, but I'm sure there are some funny ones that were in there. But wow, what great experience. And I truly appreciate you coming and joining us today.
Is the biggest thing we can all do, no matter what type of job, business, career we have, is to have these conversations and start this dialogue. Because you may be experiencing these issues, but because you've never told anybody about it, you don't know that the person next to you may also be experiencing these issues. And you don't know if, without having a conversation with your employer, they may be head over heels about, yes, we can implement some of these things. You never know until you have that conversation. And the more we talk about mental health issues, the more we're going to reduce the stigma. And the more we reduce the stigma, the more people are going to reach out for those resources, the easier it's going to be for all of us to talk about. Yeah, I suffer from PTSD. I suffer from anxiety and stress. I suffer from a lot of these things. I talk about it. And it's not, oh, I'm proud to wear this, but it's a reality. But I'm talking about it because I want to help others who either to avoid it, or if you're dealing with it, to know that there's help out there and get the resources. And thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
We could really talk more, but I know that our time is up and we have to go. We did a special, listeners, we've done a special issue today for our episode where we've taken extra time because we feel like this is a very powerful topic and a lot of resources all tied up with our featured guest here. And we encourage you to share this resource with other people. If you're a spouse, maybe get someone else to share it with your spouse so you don't trigger them. We all know somebody who's an EMT or whatever, and share the information with them. Just get them on the path to at least think about it. Is this me? So thank you, Lita. We are so appreciative of you being here, and keep in touch. Let us know.
Yeah.
Let us know if there's anything else that pops for you, and maybe we'll have you on again. So thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I truly appreciate it.
Hi, this is Chris, podcast team coordinator for A² Lamp Groups. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Stop Digging Community Podcast. Keep the conversation going. Search for the Stop Digging group on LinkedIn and don't miss out on our next episode.